Hey guys, MoiDawg here, and today we're going to be going over Squad's graphics settings. I published a settings video way back during the V2 update for Squad, but since V2.12, the graphics and optimization has been completely overhauled, changing how certain settings works and what is actually best for your system. Because of that, I've made this new and improved settings guide to help you guys fix any issues you might have and make your game look the best while getting as much FPS as possible for your unique build. I sat down with Jet, an OWI systems engineer responsible for a lot of the optimizations and graphics settings now in Squad, and we discussed everything from low and high-end PC setting suggestions to solutions for common graphical problems. By the end of this video, hopefully you'll be able to have a much better frame rate, a better looking game, and be relatively bug-free. If this video helps you out, make sure to give it a thumbs up, drop me a comment below with any other suggestions or questions you might have, and subscribe for more. And I do want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Apex Gaming PCs. I've been partnered with Apex Gaming PCs for a while now, and if you're looking to get into PC gaming for the first time, or maybe you need to upgrade an older system, Apex Gaming PCs has got you covered. I've worked with them to create a line of pre-made PCs based on your needs and budget, so if you're not sure where to start, these will get you covered. Or if you want to customize a few options like add additional RAM, upgrade a graphics card, or even add RGB lights, you can also do that. And by clicking the link in the description below and using code MOI, you can save up to $250 on your PC. That's code MOI for up to $250 off. Thank you guys again for the support, and Apex Gaming PCs for the sponsor. And now let's get on with the video. Alright, so if you're not too familiar with what Squad updated in 2.12, the gist of it is that the developers wanted to make sure that no matter what PC you had, everyone in game would see roughly the same thing. For this video, I've included timestamps throughout so you can jump around as needed, but I highly recommend you watch each section through since there are a lot of new settings options, and in addition to telling you guys what my settings are, I'm also going to be going over each graphics option, explain how it actually affects your game, and how resource intensive it can be. This is so that in the future, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of how each option interacts with your unique system, and you can adjust as needed. I'll be offering recommendations for low builds, medium builds, and high-end builds. And additionally, I'll be also going over some common graphical bugs, fixes for blurry screens, and other problems you might run into in Squad. As I do this, please keep the following in mind. Any recommendations for low-end PC builds are for those of y'all with older graphics cards that have 4 GB or lower of VRAM, such as the 10 series GTX graphics cards. Anything for medium builds are those of y'all with things around 6 to 8 GB VRAM, like the 20 series GTX graphics cards. And for high-end builds, we're talking about those of y'all with the top-of-the-line 30 series RTX cards and above that recently came out. If you don't know how much VRAM you have, go to your display settings, click Advanced Display Settings, Display Adapter Properties, and the VRAM is listed under Dedicated Video Memory. Or just Google whatever card you have and you'll see it right there. To start, as you go throughout these settings, it's important to be looking at how your computer is performing as Squad is running. To do this, open up the console by pressing tilde, and then use the commands stat FPS and stat unit to show your FPS, frame speed, game speed, draw speed, and GPU speed in the top right of your screen. I'll explain all these here in a second, but it's imperative as you're doing this that you go into a full live server, since offline servers will not have nearly enough happening in them to give you a proper representation of your performance. Additionally, maps like Gorodok, Yaharivka, Manic 5, and Goose Bay will be much better to benchmark as well, since much of what actually affects performance in Squad are now shadows, and having your game running well on these maps should give you a good baseline for the rest of the game. So let's first talk about what you're actually looking at when these numbers pop up. I'm going to keep this in simple terms to make it easy, but generally speaking, this information here is going to tell you where your bottlenecks are in your system. FPS is obvious, most of us want to get at least 60 FPS in a game like Squad, but how high or low the numbers are beneath FPS is actually much more important in order to solve your issues and improve your overall performance. To start, frame is how long it took your computer to render the current frame, and it's everything below this combined. The lower this number, the better your overall performance is. Game is the time it took for your CPU to process all the game logic going on. This means processing things like bullets flying or player health. And if this number is really high, that means that your CPU is really struggling to run the game, and nothing in the graphics settings can actually help that. Draw is how long it takes for your CPU to give the graphics the instructions for what to show you. And once again, if this is too high, you're probably bottlenecked on your CPU. Essentially, your CPU is trying to run all of the instructions for what you should be seeing in-game, and it just can't keep up with what Squad is trying to tell you. Although it's not really possible to solve game and draw issues in the graphics settings because these are CPU issues, you can actually help alleviate this problem and improve Squad performance by shutting down external programs like Chrome. The reality of the situation is, you may simply have such an old CPU that it's just too weak to run anything other than Squad. So if you think that might be you, give Squad a go with literally nothing else running on your computer. GPU is how long it takes for your graphics card to show you what you need to see on the screen. And here is where we want to focus today. The higher this number goes, the more stress the game is putting on your graphics card, and the worse performance you're going to get. So finding a good balance between what you like seeing on screen and a relatively low GPU time is the goal in this video. While discussing this, although it's a personal preference, you should be looking at around 20 ms and lower for good Squad performance, and most of what I was seeing during my tests were around 18 ms. Now, I've seen some people get 30 ms and still like the game, so once again, this is all up to you and what you think looks good, but just know that the lower the number, the better the performance. Additionally, I would like to point out that Squad has no multi-threading support for CPUs, so those of you rocking the premium builds with 16 threads, yeah, that's not going to help you for Squad unfortunately, since it will all come down to your single core performance. The things you learn talking to a developer. Alright, so instead of buying new equipment, let's dive into each one of these settings and go over what they do and my recommendation depending on your current build. Although it has been suggested in the past that performance may drop if you're not in full screen, for all intents and purposes, this is purely player preference. There's no visible change in the game whether you're in full screen, borderless, or windowed, so play the one you want and enjoy. Resolution is simply what resolution the game will be played in, and this should mirror whatever monitor you're using. As you can see, I'm still a 1080p noob and I haven't upgraded to 1440, so if you are using a 1440p monitor, you'd obviously want to check that. Now, resolution scale is the first place where we can make significant performance gains. Essentially, resolution scale will render the game at the current percent you scale it to, meaning that a 1080 resolution at 100 will be 100% of 1080, but at 115, it will be scaled up to 115% of 1080, or 1242p, giving you a higher definition picture in exchange for putting a higher load on your PC. This makes the game look really good, but you don't really want to go overboard here. Now, the reverse is also true, and a 1080p resolution scaled down to 90 will show you a picture that is 972p in quality. For low-end PC users, I would keep this at 100, and after everything, if you're still struggling for performance, you could try and knock this down to 98, 95, or even all the way down to 90, but to be honest, it just looks really bad. For both medium and high-end users, you can actually usually have this set up to 110 and 115, and get a nice crisp game without any really big performance hits. However, because this is a percentage increase, even a small adjustment like the jump from 112 to 113 can significantly affect performance. So find a level that you like, stick with it for a few games, and if you don't have any issues, try to slowly increase it to get a better picture. Below that, we have max FPS, and I would always recommend setting this to 60 in the menu, since you really don't need any more FPS when you're just finding a server. And in-game is really just personal preference. The only time I would recommend you lower this is that if you're trying to record HD game footage and you notice that your recording program is hitching or dropping a lot of frames. You might see an error called encoding overload, and if you can normally get 80 FPS in game, but you limit it to 60, you're now allowing your card more room to work on the recording program, making for less stuttery footage while still keeping a good, high-quality 60 FPS game. Oh, and this may seem like a stupid suggestion, but I've also seen players try to improve FPS, go through this entire settings page, and are at a complete loss for why they just can't get better performance, only to realize that they accidentally cap their in-game FPS at a super low value. So as we go on through here, just make sure you're at max FPS to start, so that way you can see how it affects it in-game. Afterwards, feel free to go back and lower it. VSync is another one of those options that seems to work drastically different depending on what hardware you use, but I'd recommend everyone start with this off. The simple explanation of VSync is that if your system is running your game with less FPS than your monitor can display, i.e. you're getting 100 FPS in game, but but you have a 144Hz monitor, VSync won't do anything. However, if you're running 100 FPS with a 60Hz monitor, VSync will try to sync the frame rate of the game to the refresh rate of your monitor so that you don't get any bad screen tearing. For 99% of squad users, we actually can't get more FPS than the refresh rate of our monitors, so you just need to keep this off. Now, if you do happen to have a NASA-grade space computer and you're getting something like 200 FPS, try checking VSync on if you're noticing any screen tearing with a lot of movement. One caution though is that if you do have VSync on and at any point your FPS drops down below the monitor's refresh rate due to maybe some explosions or smoke or something, you will also get a really bad screen tear and lag, as VSync will then try to compensate for the drop of frames and get it back up to that monitor refresh rate. Long story short, keep it off. Now, GPU occlusion will enable culling or removing of certain pixels that don't really need to be on your screen at that one moment. And through a number of checks, it can have minor performance increases since your GPU is no longer rendering items that's unneeded at that point in time. However, only newer and higher end CPUs will be able to take advantage of this. So if you're on a low end or maybe even a medium PC build, it's really recommended to leave this unchecked. Depending on your card, there are times where the checks basically go wrong and a pixel or group of pixels will pop out on screen. This can happen if, for example, you're turning the corner and a group of barrels or a small asset that was down an alleyway wasn't originally in your character's view, but you quickly turn down that alleyway and all of a sudden, boom, you see the barrels and other smaller assets just pop into view, making it appear as if it teleported to the position instead of always being there. If you do notice this happening quite frequently and it bothers you, turn off GPU occlusion. Graphics quality is simply the presets for everything below, so if you don't want to mess around with any settings, clicking low, medium, high, or epic will relay those to every other section. I would recommend not touching this since it will tick over to custom the moment we start tweaking things, and any selection will override whatever you've done. For anti-aliasing, this is primarily going to affect how sharp or soft the edges of objects are in your game, and although it does have some performance impacts, it's extremely minor, and I would primarily adjust AA depending on what looks best for you. As we can see here, with AA completely turned off, the edges of everything look incredibly sharp and almost staticky. By turning AA on all the way, the edges have really been softened and even blurred. So if your game has gotten insanely blurry, or it looks like players are almost ghosting at far distances because of the blur, anti-aliasing is probably the culprit. The sampling number here tells the anti-aliasing how many layers of the last image to put into the current one, which some people may see as a nice and smooth image, but others may interpret this as a weird smudge or blur. By reducing the number of samples, you're essentially reducing the images, which will ultimately reduce your blur. This is entirely subjective, but I would recommend starting at anti-aliasing on high with 8 samples to reduce ghosting and most visual issues in squad. If you're using vehicles a lot, driving, playing with iron sights, and not even using optics, to be honest, this doesn't really matter too much, and you can play around with it a lot. Now, the dynamic mesh quality setting in the view distance area helps render in players, weapons, and vehicle meshes properly. The best way to show this is by looking at this soldier here and slowly zooming out. As you can see, the player has his weapon at the ready and he's looking in whatever direction the player is actually controlling him to look. But as we zoom out, we hit a threshold where the mesh actually pops into a default placeholder. View distance changes how far this threshold is, and the lower the view distance, the less intensive it is on your computer, since the game doesn't need to keep checking what all the other players around you are actually doing, and instead gives you this default mesh. This is also super evident if you've ever zoomed in on your binos or long-range optics and seen vehicles seemingly floating over berms or down roads, since the placeholder image at a long view distance makes it so wheels and tracks stop moving. If you see this frequently and you don't like the look of it, set the view distance high for medium or high-end builds, with the best computers even trying epic. Low-end, however, keep this on low. Additionally, if you have a graphics card that has 4 GB of VRAM or lower, you will also most likely need to check low quality environment on. This helps significantly with performance, but it will make the trees and rocks look pretty bad, but at least you'll be able to play. The shaders section will also have a large hit on performance depending on your selection, and what these options here do is increase or decrease the quality of terrain shaders. Many people might not actually notice the changes here, so do click around and see what looks best for your own eyes. But this is GPU bound, meaning that if you're still having issues with keeping this GPU time down in your stat settings, you need to make material quality shaders on low. Additionally, Tesselation is a huge resource sink, and I would be extremely careful if you want to turn this on. Even with the max 3080 cards, I still wouldn't even really recommend Tesselation. It helps make the terrain look more natural and less like a copy-pasted texture, but it can have severe performance problems due to how resource intensive it is for such little gain. Not having it checked will only increase the performance of your game with little to no real visual impact. The texture setting is where most of the complaints from V2 originally stem from, and here's why. Everything in here has completely shifted from what we used to use. If you played Squad before these settings, you most likely downloaded the update and clicked the same exact settings you had before. But unfortunately for you, that was the wrong thing to do. Low is low, but medium is actually the old high setting, and high is the old epic setting. And epic, to paraphrase Jet, is completely unnecessarily high quality that no sane person should ever select it. So for example, I used to use the epic settings a year ago, but I use high now. And to be honest, most medium to high-end builds should be good to start at medium and then try out high to see how your performance goes. I wouldn't even recommend that the best graphics card computers out there select epic, and high is really where you're going to want to be. Either way, this isn't too noticeable for anything other than trees at the lowest of settings, so just pick which one gives you the best performance if you're on a higher or medium build. However, if you have a lower end PC and a low end GPU, you're going to have to keep this on low. And additionally, if you have a 4GB VRAM card, you're under the recommended system requirements for Squad, or you're experiencing blobby, low quality textures, you will also most likely have to check uncapped texture pool size. Essentially, your graphics card has only a certain amount of space it has set aside for textures. And if you're under the recommended system requirements, the allocated space in your GPU really isn't big enough even at the lowest quality settings the game was designed for. So instead, you're getting even worse textures. Checking this box allows more VRAM to help textures render properly even at the lowest settings. However, do not, and I repeat, do not check this if you have 4 GB of VRAM or over, as this will cause huge performance issues since your card will still dedicate everything to textures when it really doesn't need to. If you are getting those blobby textures, make sure to turn it on. But if you're not, try using low and just seeing how it works. Everyone else, never press this button. For anisotropic filtering, this is more of a personal preference slider with no real performance impact, and it changes the filtering method of the texture depending on what angle you're looking at. I'd honestly recommend to not even touch this and keep this as a default setting for whatever preset you have, so 8 if you select medium, or 16 if you select high, for example. Shadow quality is another area that can greatly impact performance, and it determines how realistic the actual shadows look in-game. The lower the setting, the blobbier the shadow. The higher the setting, the more realistic the shadow. As you can see here, the game will cast a like-for-like shadow if you select epic, but even a high or medium setting gives you a pretty reasonable shadow. Epic is extremely taxing on performance, so even high-end builds, I'd recommend keeping this to high or even medium, and only drop down to low settings for low-end PCs. Contact shadows, on the other hand, are relatively cheap for performance, and removing those doesn't really get much of an FPS boost, but now the entire terrain is really bare looking. Personally, I hate how that looks, and I think that the added depth contact shadows gives you is worth it. Now, if you do see a lot of shadow flickering, especially on grasses or fences, maybe metal bars, that is contact shadows, and you can turn off contact shadows or increase anti-aliasing to reduce the flickering. Ambient occlusion affects how objects look when it comes to shading and lighting, and as we can see here, ambient occlusion gives a lot of depth to objects, and by turning it down low and removing screen space ambient occlusion, some objects can look extremely flat. I notice this a lot more when simply looking at my rifle or in a corner of a room, and it makes everything feel a little less fake. If you're having poor performance already or you're on a low-end PC, keep this on low, but for other builds, it's pretty much user preference. As of recording this, however, there's an issue with ghosting or smudging, which almost looks like tar or black paint following player models as they move around shadowy areas of the map. This is actually an issue with how the ambient occlusion setting is coded, and hopefully in a future build, this will be addressed so that low reduces and removes this graphical bug. But if you're seeing this, just know that you're not crazy, and currently, as of publication, there is no way to remove it. I will make sure to edit a fix for this in the description below if this ever does get addressed. For particle quality, most systems should be able to run them on medium to high, and if you do have a higher end computer, it may be worth trying Epic or even Cinematic. Do note that Cinematic is extremely costly and will add a lot of immersive little details on effects, like tiny sparks and embers raining down from a deflected MBT or some explosions and crackling of ammo racks. This, personally, is where I am 100% on board with running at a lower frame rate, since I think these types of effects are just too good not to see. If you do have a higher end PC, try Cinematic and see if you can handle it, because it makes the game absolutely amazing during firefights. The last two settings here have no impact on performance and are completely user preference. Post-processing helps manage things like bloom or glares, making them higher or lower quality. You can't turn these off. However, by selecting low in the post-processing settings, you will be able to turn off the depth of field filter for your weapons. Lens flares, however, can be turned off and on and show up while looking into sunlight. Motion blur affects the blurring or smudging of the screen depending on how fast you move around, and screen sharpening affects the edges of objects. Color grading is also just a visual filter, however you can't adjust these too much, and personally I just like the default setting of 1.0 for all three. Realistically speaking, if you need to address any of these options here, you're probably better off looking on your actual monitor settings. Alright, you made it. We got through every single graphics setting in Squad, and hopefully now you have a better idea of what everything in that menu does and how it affects your performance. As promised, here are my settings. I'll leave this up for a minute so you can see, but I'm only going to go over and talk about a few key ones so you know why I picked them. First off, as of writing this, I have an i9 9900 CPU and a 2070 Super graphics card with 32 gigabytes RAM. So I've classified myself in the mid, maybe eking into mid high-end PCs, although the 2070 Super is definitely a little dated now. For anti-aliasing, although I've heard many people use AA samples to 8 and I recommended it here, I personally think it's just too hard to see, especially when making videos. And for me, 4 is the sweet spot. I've also elected to use Epic Dynamic Mesh Quality to remove the chances that vehicle tracks or wheels don't move at very far distances, since that is extremely immersion breaking when taking tow shots or long range vehicle battles. I also use high quality textures and shadows, but at times I do tend to turn shadow quality down to medium for things like Eye in the Sky, where I might think I might run into problems. Once again, a lot of these things are personal preference, and I average around 60 FPS in my games. But I'm okay with having a smooth 60 FPS if that means I can get cinematic explosions and some really realistic textures, since they just look so dang good. If you have a similar build, try these settings out for yourself and play around with the big performance hogs like textures and shadows, see if you can improve your frames. Now before we wrap up, I do want to address a couple bugs or problems you may run into and how you could potentially fix them. First off, way back when V2.12 first came out, many people had a bunch of horrible performance issues, and there was a fix going around that if you cleared your DirectX cache, you could improve performance significantly. Like I'm talking 20 FPS to 80 FPS type stuff. This may work, but I really think a lot of these settings changes will work better and be the real root of the problems. And I also want to say that the devs do not endorse this as a proper method, so do it at your own risk. What they do recommend, however, is before anything, first clear your game cache in-game, right-click the game in your Steam, select Properties, Local Files, and verify the integrity of your local files to make sure nothing is corrupted or installed incorrectly. This should completely reset your game so no corrupted files or lingering problems are left. And if you want to do one more, every time there's a big update, simply just uninstall Squad and reinstall. It's also usually quicker than Steam updates, and personally I found much better performance since I've started doing this. Now, you could do all of this and still run into huge hitches and crashes to desktop, and instead of it being a graphical setting, it could actually be your audio. If you notice you're getting CPU bottleneck, or you're noticing a lot of Unreal Engine crashes mid-game, especially when there's a lot of explosions or noises, try lowering your audio quality from epic to low. This will reduce your directional audio quite substantially, so you will have to get used to that, but it's much better than having Squad crash every other game. Although this isn't necessarily a graphics setting, a lot of people often come and ask me, why does everything look so little in Squad? I can't see anything with binos, I can't see anything with any of these weapon optics. Why can't I see? And that's not a graphics setting, that's actually a field of view setting. Most FPS games actually reward you if you have an increased FOV. You'll be able to see a lot more to your left and right as you move around the map. But in Squad, an increased field of view will actually make it really hard to see and hit a target. As you can see here, it is almost laughable at how small the sight picture is with a max field of view. Personally, I run a 90 field of view, and I wouldn't recommend higher than a 95. Any higher and it really becomes hard to see. But I think that's about it. I know this was a super long video, but if there's anything I didn't cover or you have a question about something, please make sure to drop a comment below and I'll try to get to as many as possible. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more, and do come and hang out with us over at the live streams at twitch.tv/MoiDawg. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.